and you can use it. Now, when I heard that the first time, it was big news to me. I was aware there was a power in the universe. I just didn't think it had anything to do with me or that I could use it. But, our great teacher in this regard was Jesus. He said the words numerous times. It's quoted in the New Testament. In Mark, which was, by the way, the first gospel written and printed. It wasn't written by Mark, but it was written by a school of Mark. And it was the first one, so it's most likely the most accurate. And in it, Jesus is purported to say when he was going into the city of Jerusalem on his last outing there, he said to his disciples, "What things soever ye desire, when you pray, pray believing ye receive them, and ye shall have them." Now, he talked about that a lot in different circumstances. He told the woman who was healed, "Woman, you're healed according to your belief." So he talked about this, but we still tend to want to attribute all the power to God or Jesus and not ourselves. But he said, "What things soever?" He said, "You can tell this mountain of olives to go into the sea, and if you believe it'll go. But we have trouble believing those things because of some of what I told you about last week, that God or the universe works for us, by working through our consciousness. And our consciousness is formed as we grow up. And so we get lots of beliefs that we're small and powerless as we grow up, don't we? I mean, when you start as a helpless little infant, and then you're a little tiny child and bigger children bully you, it's very easy to feel powerless. So that's where we form our beliefs. Like I shared about my grandson, who now has a respect for being careful around the intercoastal because he fell in once. 6 years of telling him, don't run on the sea wall, didn't teach him a thing. We tend to have to learn through our experiences. We learn so much faster when we make the mistake than when somebody else warns us about the mistake. But all those mistakes have also taught us that we get owies when we do the wrong thing. So we tend to fall into the sense of helplessness. But I wanted to share our founders. Bob, can I take this microphone and walk around? I don't want to be held to this podium. Our founder, Ernest Holmes, I wanted to share his first experiences with doing this affirmative prayer and how powerful it was. He was only about 18 years old, and he was the youngest of 7 children, 7 boys, and his older brothers, 4 of them were ministers, 1 was a psychologist. They all went off to college and did a traditional route. He was born in the late 1800s, so for that time, that was a lot of education for that family. But he dropped out of school when he was young. He wanted to study what he wanted to study, and he didn't like school. So when he was 18, he had a relative in Boston, and he went there. He loved the library, and he spent all his time in the library. He was very interested in spiritual and mystical things. But he decided to make a living. He would go to oratory school, because that was in the day of orators, and so he went to oratory school. And while he was there, he had the woman who was the wife of the owner of the oratory school was a Christian Scientist. Now, Christian Scientists believe in positive prayer, affirmative prayer, and their teacher is Jesus, and they call it scientific Christian prayer. I believe I have that right. And they have miraculous results with these prayers. So she had taught him this, and he thought that was very interesting. And so there was a student where he worked there who had terrible stage fright. He just, so how are you going to be an orator or an actor if you have stage fright? So he did this affirmative prayer for him, and he was totally over it, and was totally over it for the rest of his life. So that got his attention. And I believe it was when he was there that he started treating, we call it doing treatment, because it is a something. It's a treatment. So he did one for his mother, who her whole life long had heart disease. And she had been in bed many times. She had been ill. They felt like they almost lost her a number of times. And he started doing treatment for her heart. She got all well. She no longer had heart disease. She lived to the age of 93. So this got his attention. He was very interested in that. Now, he tried going to the Christian Science Church, but there was something about it that am I too loud, close to a speaker? There was something about it that he didn't agree with, and that was a belief in a power for evil. He really believed right from the beginning there can only be one power. There's only one power, the power of God. There cannot be a power that opposes it. And he believed that the Christian Science teaching taught, that there was a power for evil as well, as does most Christianity. We call it Satan or whatever. He didn't believe in that. He said there's only one power. And when it appears evil, it's the absence of that power. And certainly we see lots of evidence of that in our experience. Human beings are capable of lots of mischief all on our own. We don't need the help of a power of evil. So that's where it started. And so then he started teaching that. And they actually created, when he went to Los Angeles, his brother was a minister there, and he lived with them and was a youth pastor. But he started teaching some of the teachings of Thomas Troward there in Los Angeles. And then when Ernest would speak, he was speaking to huge theaters of people that came to listen to him. He got that power of oratory. He learned that in school, and he was very influential. But I wanted to go back and tell you where this goes back. I wanted to tell you where Christian Science learned it. Mary Baker Eddy had a chronic illness. And I know that Sandra grew up as a Christian Scientist. She knows a whole lot more about this than I do, so you can correct me if I misinform. Okay, good. She had a chronic illness that she couldn't before she started Christian Science. She had been very ill, and so she went to see a healer. The healer's name was Phineas Parkhurst Quimby, and he had a practice at the time where he healed people. Now, I want to go back and tell you how he learned to heal people. He had been traipsing around New England teaching hypnosis, because hypnosis was new then. And he had someone that, remember, this no radio, no TV, okay? Not much to do in town. So people would travel around speakers, and large groups would come hear them. Well, when he would hypnotize this young man that was a good subject, the young man could tune into the audience and pick out people with health problems, diagnose them, and tell them what the cure was. And people were getting healed. So one day, Phineas was practicing with this student in his office, and he noticed when he had him in hypnosis, which is just a deep state of relaxation, so the conscious mind is quieted, that his subject knew what he was thinking before he said it. For example, one day his subject was under, and he thought, I think I'll get up and go for a walk. And his subject jumped up and handed him his hat. And he said, oh my goodness, on some level, we don't even need to hear the voice. Our minds are connected. Our minds get it on some level in this relaxed state. And then he started working with, I don't know how he learned this. I think he stumbled upon it. And there was a book about that. He wrote a book called Mingling Minds. It's an old book. I don't even know if it's still in print, about this experience of figuring out that minds are connected. And that's why we call it the law of mind. And we say there's only one mind. That mind is the mind of God. And all of our minds are in it. So when we think, we are thinking into the mind of God. And we are using the mind of God, the law of God, whether we know it or not. So he figured out that he could know that someone was healthy, visualize them as healthy, and it happened for them. So he was a very successful healer. He healed people, and then he found out he could do it long distance. Now, this may not surprise you because you've done prayer for people and it's worked. And what is that but the same thing? Praying for their good, even if they're long distance, and it often happens. Not always, but often. And so he figured out that he could do this. He even told people who would write him at a distance for a healing. He'd say, now, you don't pay me until you get a healing. See, so that was pretty honest of him. And so people trusted him. Mary Baker Eddy had a healing. And she learned how he was doing it through visualizing her wellness. He didn't have to know anything about the disease or the disorder. He just saw her well, and she got well. And it had been a long chronic illness. So she then started Christian Science, recognized the passages of Jesus saying those things, and she interpreted the scriptures in this way. Christian Science churches, of course, still teach this. They, in their centers or their churches, they only read her interpretations of the scriptures. So Ernest wanted to do his own thing, and Unity churches was already in existence. And let's see, there was Divine Science was big at that time. So there was Unity, Divine Science, and at that time we started as Christians, religious science. So it's Christian Science, Divine Science, religious science. And religious science, I believe, was the last one, and it started 100 years ago. So this teaching has been going for about 100 years, and Christian Science is older than that. That's what we mean by the law of mind. You know, that there is just one mind. Now, when I learned this, I was about 30 years old, and I had a lot of things I wanted different in my life. My son was my biggest concern. I had a 2-year-old son who was starting to be sick all the time. He'd had a good first year. You know, I nursed him his first year, and he was healthy. But man, as soon as that stopped, all the illness started. And so he was like chronically ill and hospitalized like 6 times by the time he was 3 years old. And it had me in constant turmoil. You know, I wanted to see him well. So the first thing I started doing the affirmative prayer for was for him, for seeing him well. And, you know, at that time we were going to the pediatric allergist. We was going in to see his pediatrician once a week for an allergy shot. And I started learning these principles. And the first thing I did, I talked to my husband, who was didn't believe in any of this, called it all hocus pocus. He's an atheist. He doesn't even believe in God. Different husband, by the way. He didn't even believe in God, so he's certainly not going to believe in affirmative prayer. But he said, but I can see the psychology of it. I can see the psychology of it, because we thought of him as a sickly child. And he would say, Mom, can I drink milk today, or will it make me sick? You know, and we had pulled the carpet up out of his room. We had wallpapered his wall with washable, because he was allergic to dust. When we had him tested for all the things he could be allergic to, 1 of 2 varieties of dust. And for this, we threw out all of stuffed toys, you know, had his room washable, and he was still sick all the time. So we started not talking about him and not worrying about him out loud as being sick. And I called him my strong, healthy boy. And every time I put him to bed, I'd say, you know, I love you, my strong, healthy boy. And when he did get sick, I would say, okay, send it away. Let's send it away. You don't have to keep this. And so he'd say, I'm a healthy boy, huh, Mom? And I said, yes, you are. And I went to a conference in California. It was a week-long spiritual conference with his teaching. And I got the courage out there to stop taking him in for his allergy shots. Well, I got a little boost. I got a little help because he had broken out in a rash before I left. And the doctor said, don't bring him in while he's got that rash. So we had a couple of week break. And I went back and I said, I'm not taking him back. Because what he said was, they gave him a lollipop every time he went in. And they made a fuss over him. And they rewarded him for just going in. And so he didn't go back for a year and a half until it was time for his checkup to go to kindergarten. And his doctor said, oh, he outgrew his allergies, huh? I said, yeah, he outgrew them. And what he said when he walked back in there a year and a half later was, gee, I miss this place. Because they used to give him lollipops. And he was in there all the time. So he was my first, we call it a demonstration. A demonstration when you have a result of affirmative prayer, a positive prayer. And so then I started seeing what other areas I could use it in. I just had wonderful results. I should say God had wonderful results. That's one of the things I had to learn. They weren't my results, they were God's results. But I was taking classes and I would drive by this beautiful home. And I was in Fort Lauderdale, and I was driving from the west side of town to the east side of town for my business, 5 days a week, and then for classes 1 or 2 nights a week, and then for Sundays. So it seemed like I was spending all my time driving. And I drove over the bridge right before the center and saw this beautiful house. I used to just admire it. It looked like it was just enjoyed, And then one day a for sale sign went up. I said, oh, that's my house. That's my house. I claim it. It's mine. And did treatment for it. And the realtor kept wanting to know when I was going to bring my husband to see it. Well, he didn't even know about it yet. I was in no hurry. I don't know why, but I think I was waiting for the price to go down. I kept knowing the price would go down because I knew it was way out of our range. But the realtor kept pushing me to bring my husband to see it. So I finally did. And he looked, this was about 4 months later, he looked at it, he said, it's beautiful, it's wonderful, it's a good price, it's out of the question. Because, it was just out of our range. But I just kept knowing it was my house. The realtor actually got mad at me. She said, I have news for you, young lady. It is not your house until you sign that contract. But I wasn't being bothered with details like that. I was just busy knowing, like Phineas Parker Quimby, that was my house. And sure enough, it ended up being ours. And we always were able to handle the cost of it easily, effortlessly. And it was really a beautiful, wonderful demonstration. So I had evidence that this teaching worked, and from that moment on, I wanted to share this with other people because, you feel bad. People are stumbling around in misery, and there are answers, there are solutions, there's help. But I must tell you, this is a very fair universe. This system is so marvelous that God has set up. It is ultimately fair. We learn all the lessons we need to learn. We usually learn them the hard way. I think I got so carried away with my magnificent consciousness. I was busy congratulating my consciousness, as a matter of fact, and that I had to experience some hardships and treatment not working for a good many years once I got all full of myself. So when we learn these things, we need to understand that it's not our power, it's not our magnificent brain even. It's us connecting with using the power of mind. And it doesn't mean you get everything you want. You don't. There's some things that don't demonstrate, and you don't know why. You just have to trust that everything is ultimately for your highest good, even when it doesn't feel good. So this is a tricky business. isn't it? Between knowing that there's all this wonderful, powerful good in the universe and you can use it, and yet you have to accept what is. So it's a challenging thing, but it's a mature challenge. It's a mature challenge. We always want to be working on creating a better world, more harmony in our lives, more abundance in suffering. Our tagline with our home office, with our centers for spiritual living all over the world, is co-creating a world that works for everyone. We want to see good for everyone, not just for ourselves. We would like the world to learn these tools and how to live in harmony. But we do it, each one our part. Now, some of the things that you can do that's important to do is to be aware of your thinking, because, see, we're thinking into the mind of God. So it's very easy to just worry all the time, isn't it, about what's not the way we want it. And when you're worrying, what are you doing? You are rehearsing the worst case scenario. You're imagining, oh my God, what if this disaster happened, that catastrophe happened? What will I do? And we do that to kind of prepare ourselves and maybe get ready. I mean, I do it before a hurricane and prepare all the stuff I might need in a hurricane. So part of it is constructive. Most of it is destructive. Because when you cannot worry for 16 hours a day, go to sleep and have fear dreams, wake up and do 5 minutes of treatment and affirmation and expect to see your results. Do you see? It's accumulative. It's the amount of time that you spend in that mind state is a something. It's a something. So we have to, you're the only thinker in your mind. And we're far too lenient with our minds. We just let our mind run rampant. We can't do that. We have to bring ourselves back to truth principles. When we find ourselves scaring ourselves, worrying. I'm telling you, with parenting, it's a godsend to remind yourself not to worry. That worrying about them is not helping them. It's certainly not helping you. And of course we are concerned about those we love, and we don't want any harm to come to them, but we have to always remember they're safe. It just helped me so much with my children to know. I used to say the silliest thing that used to bring me out of worry. Because, in those days, they would roam the neighborhood, and you weren't sure where they were and when they were coming home. And I would just say, leave them alone, and they'll come home, wagging their tails behind them. And fortunately, that happened. So that is my take on how to use the science of mind, how to use the law of mind. But there are some steps. And now we have 5 steps, we have 7 steps that we teach in our classes. But today I wanted to share with you a simple 4-step one of how to do an affirmative prayer. The first step is to acknowledge. You're acknowledging that the power is God's power. The second step is to align with it, knowing that your mind is connected to the mind of God. So you are one with God. You live and move and have your being in God. Because God's all that is. God's big creative energy. So you're in it. You're aligned with it. And then you affirm what you want. You say it in the present tense as if it's already done. So if I'm worried about being ill, I say, I am well. I'm whole and complete and well. Right here, right now. You say it in the present tense as if it's already so. And then you accept it. See, it's not done until you accept it. You're saying, oh, I hope this works. I hope this works. You just canceled your whole thing, So you have to accept it. And it's kind of like daydreaming, imagining what it'll be like to experience that. That's what you do. You let yourself feel good that this is happening. So that's how we use affirmative prayer. It's very powerful. It's what this teaching is all about. Ernest Holmes said, all this philosophy does nobody any good if they're not demonstrating it. He wanted to see people using it. And so we invite you to. They believed in it so much and it was so powerful. When he went to L.A., they started a sanitarium, which was, and it wasn't for mental illness, it was for physical illness. But people came from all over the country for them to do this affirmative prayer for. And it worked.